Hello, my name is Chef Kevin Mitchell, and I am a chef instructor here at the Culinary Institute of Charleston, located here in Charleston, South Carolina. Today I want to share a really great dish with you that has some connections to the new year as it relates to eating rice and peas for the new year in the African American community. Now we know that when we eat things like rice and peas or hop and john, those particular ingredients in those things represent specific things. So I'm going to go through the ingredients first, and then we'll get into a little bit about some of the history and why we're doing this dish. Also, as I go through some of the ingredients, I also will focus in a little bit on some of the health benefits of each ingredient. So this dish is called peas and greens. So with that, it's a dish that pays homage to my grandmother, who was teaching me how to cook at the age of 6, where she would always make a fresh pot of collard greens and also do a fresh pot of peas, whether they're black-eyed peas, pinto beans, sea island red peas, so on and so forth. So what I decided to do was honor her by cooking this dish by bringing both those ingredients together, and also with some of the other ingredients that are in here, honor the legacy of the formerly enslaved Africans here in Charleston with some of the spices. So first thing, we'll talk about the ingredients. So I have some onion here. I have some black-eyed peas that have already been pre-cooked, soaked overnight. Then you cook them just before you're going to make this dish. I have some chopped garlic, some curry, bebre. And bebre is a spice that comes to us from Ethiopia. It contains about 20, 30 different things in things like pepper, cayenne, cinnamon, so on and so forth. And I use this because it has a really great depth of flavor. But if you don't have it, you can substitute cayenne pepper. I have some turmeric, red pepper flake, salt, some black pepper, diced tomato, vegetable stock, coconut milk, and then the reserve liquid from cooking the peas, because that's going to add a little bit more depth of flavor as well. And then, of course, some fresh collard greens. These collard greens are grown here locally in South Carolina. I got them from a farmer named Nat Bradford who does some really great things with some local ingredients. And then one other thing, I have some minced ginger that will complement this particular dish. All right, so first thing I do is I have some coconut oil in my pan, and then as it gets hot, you can see as it starts to shimmer, you can see that this oil is really nice and hot and ready to go. So what I'm gonna do is, first thing is saute my onions. Get those going. All right, you want to cook these until they become opaque or basically see-through. Right, and what you can also do is caramelize, which basically means you're going to brown the natural sugars in these onions, which gives it a really nice sweet flavor to complement the coconut milk and offset the spice from the bebre and also from the crushed red pepper. Once I have my onions going, these are looking pretty good. I'm going to add some minced garlic. A lot of times people get confused as to when to add minced garlic when they're cooking. You should always add it after you add the first ingredient, because your oil is very hot, and when you add the garlic in, the oil is so hot that it actually makes the garlic burn. And once it burns, it becomes very bitter and then basically will ruin the flavor of your dish. So I just cook the garlic long enough until I can actually start to smell it cooking, which is right about now. And then here, once again, I have some ginger paste. And I'm gonna mix this in, and this is gonna add that nice ginger flavor. Also, it's gonna add a little bit of spice to it because ginger is a little spicy. Right? You want to cook that until you can start to smell the ginger cooking. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding my dry spices. Right? We want to add your dry spices now as opposed to adding them at the end, because the heat from the pan and the oil allows for the natural essential oils to come through, and you actually cook out any bitterness that may be in those spices. So I have, once again, my bebre, that Ethiopian spice. I'm going to add my curry powder. Crushed red pepper. Now here you can add as much or as little as you want. Depends on how spicy you want your dish to be. Right, and I can start to smell. You can smell that bebre and that curry powder starting to cook out. Then I'll add some turmeric. Now here I'm going to add a little bit of salt. I'm not going to add too much because the reserved pea liquid has a lot of salt in it, because when you cook the peas, you cook them down with a couple cloves of garlic, of course water, some fresh thyme, and then you throw, of course, loads of salt in there. So as that's cooking now, I want to start looking at my other ingredients. So now I'm going to start adding my collard greens. Right, and here these, of course, have been cleaned. We cut them into strips, and we throw these in here. And basically, you're going to start to see the greens start to turn a really nice bright green. And of course, as they cook, they start to wilt down. So this may look like a lot of greens, but it's just enough. Now here I'm going to add a little touch more salt, because the salt is going to help bring out the natural moisture of the greens. Now, not only this dish is nutritious, also, well, delicious, it's very nutritious. So with the collard greens, there's many different health benefits to you eating collard greens. Right? So collard greens detoxify your body. They're very good when you're dealing with focusing in on weight loss. They also have chemicals in here that help prevent cancer and so many other health benefits. Right, so these are starting to cook down. Now I don't want to cook them too much, because I want them to still maintain that nice green color. So now I'm going to add some diced tomatoes. Diced tomatoes, you can just use the ones from the can. It's right about now. We're in January. Tomatoes are not necessarily that much in season right now, but a really great substitute is diced tomatoes from the can. And you can use the tomatoes and the liquid from the tomatoes. That's going to help release some of those herbs, some of those spices that are cooked at the bottom of the pan, and of course add some flavor. Now I like to use tomatoes because they're very healthy for you. They contain a lot of vitamin C. Also other vitamins that help in the aid of digestion, the reduce of heart failure, so on and so forth. Right, so it's starting to look good. Now, once again, now I'm going to add just a little pinch of black pepper. And then I'm going to move to my vegetable stock. Now, you can purchase this in any grocery store as vegetable broth, but if you don't have it, you can purchase chicken stock, beef stock, or even use water. Right? Now, I use vegetable stock because I want to keep this vegetarian, because what's very important to remember that the traditional diet of African Americans was 100% strictly vegetable based. Very rarely did Africans in Africa eat meat protein. If they did, it was only eaten for special occasions. And as we were brought here through the transatlantic slave trade, we were introduced to other meat proteins, and specifically if you're in the South, we're looking at pork. All right, so I'm going to add some vegetable stock. And then I'm going to let that cook down for a minute or so. And once again, I'm not adding any salt or any more salt because the peas are heavily seasoned in that water that contained a lot of salt in it. All right, so as this cooked down, let's talk a little bit about black-eyed peas. So black-eyed peas, this particular pea is formerly called a cow pea. Cow peas, they were called cow peas mainly because formerly enslaved African Americans would serve these to cows, right? And so at some point, someone said, well, if cows can eat these particular peas, why can't people eat these particular peas? Black-eyed peas are very healthy. They contain a lot of fiber. They help with the storage of energy. And also, they also aid in some digestion as well. So now I just want to taste the broth here. I want to add a touch more curry. You really want to taste the curry in this. So we'll let that cook down. You can see how beautiful these greens look. They have this really beautiful bright green color. And I don't want to cook this too long because what happens when you cook these too long, the greens start to lose all their nutrients, and that's not what you want. And then, of course, they start to turn brown. For me, the word is very important. Greens. Greens should be green when you eat them. And greens have a very important history as it relates to African Americans, formerly enslaved Africans, as it relates to a dish or a thing called pot liquor. And pot liquor is the liquid that's left over when you cook a pot of greens. It could be mustard greens, collard greens, beet greens, it can even be cabbage. And in that liquid contains a lot of the nutrients that come from collard greens. And what used to happen during this transatlantic slave trade, slave owners would eat a pot of greens, and then as a throwaway, they would give slaves pot liquor, not really understanding that the pot liquor was the healthiest part of the green. And that's how a lot of enslaved African Americans sustained themselves throughout the time of slavery. All right, so now I'm going to add in a little bit of coconut milk. And coconut milk has a little history to the African diaspora as well, because at times when formerly enslaved Africans or African Americans would cook a pot of greens, a lot of times they didn't have anything that was really fatty to give them this unctuous sustenance of flavor. And coconut milk does contain a good deal of fat, but it contains good fat, and it also can be used to help lower your cholesterol. But you have to, because once again, it is a saturated fat, you want to eat this in moderation because it can raise your good cholesterol or even raise your bad cholesterol at the same time. So you want to be careful of that. Also, I want to add this reserve pea liquid. In here it has all the deep, rich, earthy flavors from the peas. Of course, it has salt because there was salt cooked in the water, and also some garlic. Also, bay leaves, and I also did throw in a sprig of fresh thyme in that as well. So I add the pea liquid because the pea liquid also contains a little bit of starch, which helps thicken this broth, right? Because you want to eat this more like a stew. Right? So we're going to cook this down, and it's going to start to thicken on its own, and I'll taste it. That's really good. Really spicy. Now, once again, like I said, the beauty of this particular recipe and recipes throughout is that you can tailor them to your taste. If you like more garlic, add more garlic. If you want it spicier, add more pepper flake or some other type of pepper, cayenne. Once again, I use this bebre because it has, once again, 25 to 30 different ingredients, and a lot of the ingredients in here are different types of chilies that come from Africa. Now, once this is done, we're going to serve this over a bed of white rice. Now, the rice that we're using here, this is Carolina Gold rice. This is the rice of South Carolina. This is the rice that made Charleston the city that it is today. At one point, the cultivation of rice made Charleston, South Carolina, the richest, wealthiest city in the world, right? And how does that happen? Well, when French planters and other people come to this area, they recognize that there's rice growing prevalently throughout the area. They particularly don't know how to cultivate rice. So in their minds, they think of those people that do. And then their minds go towards those people that live in West Africa, places like Sierra Leone, Senegambia, where the cultivation of rice was, of course, prevalent. So they bring those people from those areas to this area to cultivate rice, specifically Carolina Gold. Now, Carolina Gold rice is called Carolina Gold because the outer shell, before it's shucked or hulled, is gold in color. And as it goes through the mill, the hull removes itself, and then you have those grains of Carolina Gold rice. Now, Carolina Gold rice, once again, very, very popular in this area throughout the 17, going into the 1800s, basically until the end of the Civil War. Right? At the end of the Civil War, mostly all the rice plantations and the rice fields in this area were destroyed. So we lost Carolina Gold rice, and at one point, the most popular rice in that time becomes, in the early 1900s, becomes what we knew of as Uncle Ben's, which is a converted brand rice. We call it Ben's favorite now, but Uncle Ben's was the most popular rice up until the early 2000s, when a gentleman named Richard Schultz had the original seeds for Carolina Gold rice, and he was able to convince farmers to start to reintroduce this rice back into basically back onto the tables of many people here in the South. And that was done by Mr. Glenn Roberts, who owns Anson Mills, and it's a mill in Columbia, South Carolina, that mills some of the old original grains and peas and things that were cultivated by formerly enslaved African and African Americans in this area. So things like Sea Island red peas, which is what I don't have, but Sea Island red peas is an ancient pea that was cultivated by many enslaved or formerly enslaved African Americans. Bene seeds, right? Bene seeds are what we would call true sesame seeds that come to us from Africa. Bene seed very important during the antebellum period because of the many uses. You can parse it for oil, and at one point it was the major cooking oil here in the Charleston area late into the 1800s. Very popular to the fact that Thomas Jefferson actually tried to grow Bene in Virginia. It was very unsuccessful because the growing conditions were not conducive to growing Bene in Virginia, but he wrote about it in his journals how the enslaved would use these seeds. So oil. Then the most famous application here, specifically if you ever come to Charleston, are going to be Bene seed wafers, right? Which is, little cookies made with these Bene seeds. Also, it was a way of adding protein to a pot of greens. So if you didn't have any smoked pork product, but you wanted that unctuous flavor and feeling of being sustained by this hearty pot of greens, they would grind it and then actually fold it into a pot of collard greens. And that would actually, in some ways, thicken the broth a little bit and then give you some of that sustenance. Right, so now I'm going to add my black eyed peas. And these have been pre-cooked, right? So, which aids in the cooking time for this dish. So what you do is you soak these in some water overnight. And then the next day, you put them in a pot, you drain that water, you add them to a pot with fresh water. Once again, some bay leaves, salt. I like to throw whole cloves of garlic in there. I also like to throw some thyme sprigs in there as well. And then you cook them until they're just tender. Strain them. And then once again, keep that liquid in which the peas were cooked in to add to this particular dish. Right. So when I add the peas, I'm only putting them in here or keeping them on the fire long enough so the peas warm through, because once again they're already cooked, right? You don't want to continue to cook them too far because they'll start to get mushy and fall apart. You want these peas to maintain some of that natural, for one, flavor and also their natural shape. Right, so as that cooks, let me plate this up for you. Now, once again, I have this pot of Carolina Gold rice. The rice is, of course, cooked. Here, what I've done was you take the rice and you rinse it. And what you're doing is you're removing as much starch from the rice as possible. So sometimes you may have to wash this rice 7, 8, 9, 10 times, right? And you want to do it until the water that you're using to wash or to rinse this rice runs clear. What that does, once again, it removes the starch and it allows for the grains to be separate when you serve it, right? And that is the mark of a true Gullah cook from this particular area of cooking rice. When the rice is done, the grains are separated. Right. So then I'll just take some of my rice. Now I've boiled this in some water. I've threw some salt in there to flavor it. You can throw some bay leaves in here. You can also throw some sprigs of thyme. And then what I've done is once it comes to a boil and the rice is tender, With this particular rice in this particular recipe, I take the rice and I drain it of all the excess water, and then I'll lay it out on a tray or a baking sheet. And then what that does is allow for the rice to dry. Also, I take some pats of butter, or you can do a little bit of vegetable oil, olive oil, and kind of stir that in, and then that will further kind of enhance the flavor. All right, so now I'm gonna take once again, you want to you serve it right over rice. Get some of that liquid in there. There you have it. Peas and greens served over a bed of Carolina Gold rice. A really great way of introducing a new way of having Hoppin' John or celebrating the beginning of a new year by introducing peas and rice into your diet. So if you don't want to make specifically Hoppin' John, you can make this dish, and then you can actually carry on that tradition throughout the year of bringing in wealth and prosperity into your lives, because we know that the greens themselves represent paper money, the peas represent coins, right? And that rice would represent prosperity. And that's why many African Americans and people in general eat a dish similar to this, whether it's rice and peas or Hoppin' John, so on and so forth, on New Year's Day to bring in that once again prosperity and wealth into your new year.